Welcome to this GDN webinar. We will start the broadcast in just a moment.
Hello, my name is Kathleen Massey, and I'm the new president of the Groningen Declaration Network, and I'd like to welcome you to the GDN's new webinar series. I'm so pleased that you have decided to participate in the GDN by attending today's webinar. Your involvement is critical to the success of the network. The GDN is a global organization that brings together people and organizations who are committed to making it possible and easy for people worldwide to consult and share their authentic educational data with whomever they want, whenever they want, wherever they are. Today, you are joining thought leaders from across the world to pave the way for this to be done well, equitably, and by developing trusted networks and using contemporary secure technology. I invite you to continue your involvement in the GDN by attending additional webinars and by joining us at our next annual meeting in Ottawa, Canada, in May 2021. I hope you find this live webinar both informative and engaging, and I thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Melanie, and welcome to everybody from across the world. It is good to be talking to you today about something that I think is close to all of our hearts. We live in a new world, in a world where digital has become even more important than it was before COVID-19. We have an excellent panel with us today. One of our panel members haven't joined yet, but we have the 3 other panel members. And I'll just quickly start and introduce you to the 3 of them. And maybe let me start with myself. My name is James Kiwi. I'm based in South Africa. I head up a non-profit organization called Jet Education Services. And I also have quite a bit of experience working at the Qualification Authority in South Africa and also into Africa. My passion is credentials and qualifications and learning. And I think even more importantly, my passion is to realize lifelong learning. In the 1960s and 70s, and Maureen, you would know this, the Fora report and the Dolores report spoke a lot about lifelong learning. My view is that for the first time in the world, in the global community where we are, we can realize that vision. I think that vision was maybe a vision before its time. And now today where we stand, we are in a position to realize it. And this divide between formal, non-formal and informal is dissipating very quickly. So I'm quickly going to introduce you to the panel. We are not going to use any slides today, so I hope that makes everybody very excited because we're going to be talking to you and we're really going to try and have an engaging session with you today around things around lifelong learning and about learner data portability in particular. We're going to have case studies from India. So Pankaj is going to go first and talk to us about a case study from India. Pankaj is the Secretary General of the Association of Indian Universities and comes with an incredible track record, including being one of the first women to be in this position, Pankaj, I see, for 95 years. Now, that's pretty impressive. The second panelist that we have with us is Boreen Chakroon, based at UNESCO. Boreen and I have personally worked together for many years, Boreen, and so it's a pleasure to have you online again. I see you getting busier and busier all the time due to added responsibilities. But Boreen at the moment is Director of Policies and Lifelong Learning Systems at UNESCO HQ in Paris. Alex Kaplan. Alex, welcome. Alex is from IBM, and he does a lot of global work on the application of emerging technologies. And Alex, by the way, we've got a couple of IBMers joining us very soon in South Africa. I'm sure you'd be quite interested to hear about that because that's also a really important thing that's happening internationally with IBM supporting many nonprofits across the world. Our session is going to be divided broadly into 2 halves. In the first half, Pankaj, and Alex, if you don't mind, I'm going to swap you around to go straight after Pankaj. Both of you will have about 7 to 8 minutes to tell us a little bit more about what you do. We're going to pause for a second there and take some Q&A and make sure we're covering everybody and also respond to the questions. And then Boreen, I will introduce you in the second half. And if our third panelist or our fourth panelist doesn't pitch, I will stand in for that person, Boreen, so you and I will have a bit more time. And then we're going to close out around the Q&A right at the end. So without wasting any further time, I'm really excited about engaging you today on a topic that is close to my heart and the panelist's heart. And we're really going to be talking about what does digital learning mean? What does digital credentials mean? How do we manage data? Also, what does data privacy mean? because we can't talk about credentials and learning when we don't talk about data privacy. So Alex, I hope you're going to talk about SSI very briefly, because that's also a really important topic when we talk about credentialing and mobility of learners. Pankaj, can I kind of give right over to you? So you've got about 7 minutes or so, Pankaj, maximum 10 minutes. Tell us a little bit more about what's happening in India at the moment. Thanks, Pankaj.
Thank you, James. Thanks for the nice introduction, and thanks for setting the tone for the webinar. And thanks to GDN for inviting me here and giving me an opportunity to speak. When I speak of India, recently India has launched the National Education Policy after a gap of 34 years. This is the third policy in India. First was in 1968, second was in 1986, and right now 2020 we have, after 34 years, a new education policy. Now this education policy is very forward-looking, innovative, student-centric and democratic. Democratic because we have consulted something like 200,000 people while formulating this policy. So now when we talk of sort of a portability or the way the credits can be transferred in this policy, we have brought 2-3 very innovative concepts. One is that we have in India a platform called Swayam, which is a India MOOCs platform, on which many MOOCs courses are there, something like 2,000 courses are there. And anybody, anywhere in the world can be doing those MOOCs courses. And I think this is only in India that we are allowing the transfer of credits from the MOOCs courses on Swayam in the regular degree programs. So in a regular degree program, whether at bachelor's or master's level, up to 40% of the credits can be transferred from the MOOCs courses done on the Swayam platform. So this is in a way opening up the opportunities for our students to learn from any teacher. A good teacher, I mean, they don't have to depend upon only the teachers who are in their own universities or in their own colleges. They can be studying from teachers who are teaching through the Swayam platform on the MOOCs courses. So that is one. Secondly, a very innovative concept which is coming is the ABC. And when I say ABC, it is Academic Bank of Credit. So Academic Bank of Credit is another revolutionary step which has come up in the new education policy. And ABC will be like a commercial bank in which you deposit money. In ABC, you deposit credits. And how do we deposit credits? Like right now in India, if you want to do a particular degree program, you have to join a particular university. You cannot be shifting universities within a program. But ABC is a revolutionary concept in which if you want to do different courses from different universities, you can. So 2 courses from some other university, 3 from some other universities, 5 from some other universities. And then after doing those courses, you go to the ABC and then you say that you deposit my credits in your bank. So every student will be having an account in the ABC, Academic Bank of Credit. And once the student is having an account and he keeps on depositing the credits in that bank, then the credits, I mean, he will have an account in which it will be indicated that this credit, I mean, this student has these many credits from these universities on these many subjects with these grades. So once he has achieved a threshold number of credits, for example, suppose he has accumulated something like 150 credits, and out of 150 credits, around 120 credits, he wants to redeem for a degree. So in India, normally for a graduation, you need around 120 credits. So with those 120 credits, he can go to a university, tell them that these are the 120 credits I earned, out of which these are in the core subjects, these are the credits which I have done from your university. So the university will redeem those credits into a degree. So then in his account, the number of credits which were already 150 will be reduced to 30 because 120 has been redeemed to get a degree. And then these credits will also have a shelf life. When I say shelf life, I mean that the once you earn a credit, it will lie in the bank forever in the account of the student. But then if you want to redeem it for a degree, then it will not be redeemable if the shelf life is over. For example, the shelf life of courses like say history, literature, languages, they may be longer, but the shelf life of the courses like AI, robotics, or advanced technologies, that will be shorter. So there will be a shelf life of the courses also. So these are the methods in which we are trying to have a sort of a student portability also, that students can move from one institution to another. And apart from that, a lot of emphasis is being given to digital learning, and a lot of open education resources being prepared for adopting the flipped classroom model approach. So far, India was not having the flipped classroom model, and the main teaching was done in the classrooms. Now with more OERs, maybe we will shift to flipped classroom model, and the emphasis will be on creativity, problem solving, application oriented, curiosity-led education, critical thinking like this. And rote learning. So far, rote learning was, the examinations were testing the rote learning. And now in the new system, the examinations will be continuous evaluation throughout the semester so that the actual working, actual thinking, actual application oriented or actual understanding of the student is judged. And the policy also promotes open book examinations in which the books will be given to the student and the student can be assessed based on the understanding of the concepts and not the rote learning. So these are some of the new features. Apart from that, many more are there. Maybe in the questions I'll take up. Thank you.
Pankaj, just a quick question. Is data privacy an important component of what you're busy with? Did you get the question, Pankaj, around data privacy? Is data privacy an important component?
No,
Looks
James,
like she's struggling with her
please repeat. I could not hear.
Looks like she's struggling with her connection. Pankaj, did you get my question?
I think so.
Do you want to respond briefly just around data privacy? Pankaj, if you don't mind, I'll come back to you just so that we make sure your connection is okay, so we don't waste any time.
I'm able to hear you.
If that's okay, I'm going to move on, Pankaj. I'll come back to you. Let's just check your connection. Manuela, we are very glad that you are with us. We are thought we can have more. Maureen and I have already reallocated your time.
You're talking about the question which is.
Pankaj, if you don't mind, I'm just going to mute you for a second, and then when we, as soon as we've got the better connection, I'm going to bring you back in.
You're telling me about the question which is.
Okay, so sorry, colleagues, I had to mute that just so we can move on. Pankaj, I'm going to come back to you, and then we're going to go on. So everybody who's on the call, I'm just quickly going to introduce Manuela, and Manuela, we've just rearranged the order a little bit. So Alex is going to go next, then we'll take a quick break around Q&A, and then Maureen, and then you, if that's okay with you. Okay. So Manuela is from the European Commission, and she's the Director for Skills in the DG for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. So Manuela, it's really good to have you with us, and we appreciate the European kind of context that we're going to get in a few minutes from you. Alex, can I swap to you? So IBM as a kind of corporate in terms of your involvement, we've heard kind of a lot of kind of government, university stuff from Pankaj. What is IBM doing in this area? And can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. Can you hear me okay? Just want to check on the voice quality. Great, terrific. So I lead IBM's efforts around the application of blockchain for industry and learning credentials. This is a journey we began about 3 years ago in 2018 when we started to look at the fact that the world was moving much more towards a skills-based economy, and that skills were becoming the currency of the future for people who were looking for jobs or trying to figure out what their career pathways were and looking for guidance about, what kind of skills they might need to continue to be relevant. With the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, this has really picked up in urgency as we've looked at enormous numbers of people who have been displaced from their jobs. They've lost their jobs. They need to be reskilled, or people need to change careers. So our work has really focused on how can we reduce friction in the talent marketplace, and how can we empower individuals with information that they need in order to make decisions around their own careers, and how can we provide employers access to better quality information about individuals in order to make decisions and see who's out there in terms of filling their jobs. This work has been incredibly interesting and I think really useful. From an internal IBM perspective, we're looking at it in terms of thinking about jobs of the future and the employee population that we're managing. We have over 350,000 employees in our company, and how do we reskill them? How do we keep them current in their jobs? And then externally, we've been working with a lot of organizations, both academic as well as corporate, as well as government, to figure out how could one create a global infrastructure that could support the exchange of digital credentials, which are exemplars of skills. And so we've really focused on the infrastructure side of all of this because, you know, our analysis of the marketplace has shown us that there's a lot of inefficiency and a lot of challenges for an individual to take the credentials that have been awarded to them, to use those credentials to chart out a path for their career, to use them to apply for jobs or to graduate school, and for employers to understand the provenance of that credential and the information about that credential. So we've been doing work in blockchain, in particular, something called the Learning Credential Network blockchain as a core enabling technology. Now, the reason that we went down that path is because, as you all know, I'm sure everybody knows, there's been an explosion in the use of credentials, micro-credentials, digital credentials across all sectors of the economy. And the reason that this explosion has happened is because of the need to really understand at a much more granular level the skills, the specific skills that people have attained. But in doing so, we need to solve some real challenging issues around them. One is the validity and trust of the credential itself. And surveys have shown that 30% or more of information provided by individuals around their skills can range everywhere from aspirational to fraudulent. So that's a big challenge to solve. They've also, you know, shown that people are anxious to get very high fidelity information about their own career pathways and what job prospects are out there. And all of this information is stored, these digital credential information are stored in thousands, tens of thousands of separate databases around the world. And that's rightfully so. IBM itself has issued over 3 million credentials to its own employee population since we began our digital credentialing program about 4 years ago. And every academic institution is issuing credentials, governments, and so on and so on. So there's no possible way to create a unified database of these credentials and bring them all together. Blockchain is a very intriguing technology in regard to this because it allows us to convene and give a safe place to share information that all of us would consider to be, really important and private information about individuals. And blockchain allows us to pull these credentials together and provide them to an individual in a secure wallet. So our work has focused on making it possible for an institution, organization to write these credentials to a blockchain in a shared framework. And then equally as importantly, to hand off autonomous control of those credentials to the individual. So let me dig in a little bit more about the concepts around self-sovereign identity here and why we've gone with blockchain. You know, as an individual, I want to be able to control this data. I wanted to be able to act autonomously and anonymously with this information. And so in order to make that happen, we've gone down the path of providing wallets for people where when a credential is issued by an organization, the individual has the opportunity to download those credentials, to accept those credentials. And once they accept those credentials, the control of that credential is passed from the issuing organization to the individual. At that point, just like we would have with a medical records wallet, the exact same concept, at that point, the individual now has decision-making control over those credentials, and only they have the authority to share those credentials with others. So we wanted to give them a lot of power regarding those credentials in terms of deciding which credentials to share, with whom to share it, what information within the credentials could they share, and could they make available. We wanted them to be able to expose the credentials anonymously or to reveal themselves. And so self-sovereign identity gives us the capability to make that happen using the public-private key capabilities of a global blockchain here. Now, once that individual has those credentials in their wallet and let's say they want to share them anonymously, the other advantage of self-sovereign identity in this regard is that it also would allow an individual to make this information about themselves available in an anonymous fashion such that employers or schools could search on those skills. So if I'm an employer now and I'm looking for an individual, let's say with depth in Python as a programming language, for example, I can go in, I can search on Python, I'm going to be taken to a list of individuals. I can identify where I want them to be geographically, and that list is going to show me people who already have trusted and verified credentials. And then I can reach out to them anonymously. I can send a note off and I can say, hey, I see that, I see that you got these skills. You might be interested. Would you like to connect? The individual will receive that connection request and will make a decision whether or not to share that individual's and to share that information and to expose it to them. So in this way, we're compliant with all the regulatory schemes around the world, GDPR, the ones in California, emerging ones around the world, around informed consent in regard to the credentials and the fact that an individual themselves is making those decisions. We think this is a really essential component of portability, since this wallet can go with them through life, so that people can accumulate all the credentials they've earned from every place they've worked or they've gone to school, and they can take and they can move those credentials with them throughout their cradle to career journey. We think it's essential, again, that this be under the control of the individual, that this is not data that can or should be monetized, and we think that it serves as a glue that can really reduce inefficiency in the talent marketplace that we have today and really raise the value and the stakes for credentials, for skills-based credentials.
Thanks, Alex. Can I just do a quick follow-up, Alex, in terms of your private-public relationship? So are you functioning mainly outside of government institutions, or what is the correlation with systems like ONET and others, if you're familiar with it in the US and other places? Just if you can briefly elaborate on that. And as you do that, Pankaj, a couple of questions for you in the chat if you just want to look at them in the meantime. Thanks, Herman, for posting questions, and we encourage others to post as well. Otherwise, we're going to be talking to ourselves. Alex, go for it.
Yeah, so we're heavily involved in public-private partnerships. So I think about this in a number of different ways. So let's start with the public-private partnership. So I lead IBM's efforts in work we're doing with the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board in the United States, which is an initiative from the United States Department of Commerce and the White House to figure out how to create an infrastructure for what's called learning and employment records. And we just had a meeting last week at the White House to talk about the progress that we've made. Public-private partnerships are an essential component of this because not only is industry growing in terms of its use of credential issuance, but so too is government. And from a policy perspective, what our federal government is really focused on is providing information to people to make it easier for them to find jobs and to find educational opportunities. And so we've all coalesced around this idea of learning and employment records as a key definition and infrastructure for making that happen in the United States. On the private sector side of it, given the way that we work in the United States, we're taking the lead with government support, but of course we're keenly aware of the activities going on around the world and different kinds of models, but the concept is basically the same. Now, you mentioned ONET and others. So there's a very large and important group of standards bodies that are doing really groundbreaking work around the world in regard to all the different facets that play into this. So open skills stack is important. We've looked at comprehensive learner records. We're working with the consortia out of MIT on verifiable credentials. So there are a lot of standards discussions around facets of this that have to do with career pathways, that have to do with the validity of credentials themselves, that have to do with skills. And we're completely plugged in with all of those. Our focus is really on architecting and constructing this technology so that it can work and it can work in an interoperable basis. And we're relying on these standards bodies to help guide the way to the kinds of standards that we should be adopting.
Okay, perfect. Alex, can I park a question with you? You don't have to answer immediately, but on the US credential framework and whether you're familiar with what's happening there. But I'm just going to switch to Pankaj first and come back to you if you can answer that in a minute. Pankaj, a couple of questions, but I think the most important one or the most significant one I'm seeing from Herman is around Aadhaar and how it works, the authentication system. Do you have any knowledge of that or do you work with it?
The Aadhaar is a unique identification number which is given to the citizens of India. till Aadhaar came, there was no unique identification number for the citizens. But now this unique identification number is there, which sort of collects, I mean, the government collects a little information, not a lot of information, little information just to identify a person based on the Aadhaar. Now, another question was with regard to the National Academic Depository, NAD and DigiLocker. Now, in India, we have also started around 3-4 years back a National Academic Depository. So this National Academic Depository is again a depository in which the academic credentials of the students are deposited. So right now, if any university is giving a degree, then the employer, if they want to get the degree verified, they have to write to the university and then the degrees are verified. But now with this National Academic Depository, the degrees are uploaded in a system, in a soft copy, and the student can download the copy as well as the employer, if they want the verification, that can be done through NAD. So that has made the system very easy and foolproof, and then the sort of fake degrees which were there, they will all be eliminated. But when you talk of the ABC, it is talking about the ABC, that how it will be done through NAD. So like NAD is a special purpose vehicle, for ABC also there will be a special purpose vehicle, and a bank will be created by the Ministry of Education, where the students will be able to deposit their credits and then redeem them for getting a degree within any university wherever they want to go.
Okay. So what's very interesting, Alex and Pankaj, is a very kind of government-driven approach, Pankaj, that you're explaining to us. And Alex is a very independent private sector, although there's strong collaboration between the two. Alex, just quick on your questions. I'm sure you've read them there. Do you want to respond to a couple of them, including, if you can, to the credential framework? Do you want me to quickly read them? So the first one was, how do we read out aspirational self-attestations? Would you say that, is it qualified web authentication services might help in providing trust? That's the one. And then from Mark, the other one, what mechanisms are used to ensure the trust relationship, again, is maintained between the issuer and the holder in that process? Alex?
Sure. So, our view about credentials is that it's a continuum. And so it's a continuum from self-claim to verified and authenticated. So on one hand, you have an individual who says, I'm a master at baking, and I could provide some evidence around that. The other end of the continuum is I'm a physician and I have a license to practice. So our view of this is that, so from an infrastructure perspective, it doesn't matter. This is really a question for the users of the credentials to make a determination of where on the continuum a credential falls and the value that that credential has relative to whatever their objectives might be, whether that be hiring, whether that be education, assignment to a position, a project, or whatever. So what we'd like to see in the credential and the work that we're doing from an infrastructure perspective is around the payload within the credential itself. So we think that the important question here really is about what information can be provided about that credential such that the receiver of the credential has enough information to make a decision. And within that credential itself, the kinds of things that we think are essential to it are provenance, who issued the credential. There's a description of the skills that are aligned to a sort of standard skills framework. What skills were attained within the credential. Who is it who validated and confirmed the credential? So you could potentially look at the professor who made the decision to confirm that the micro-credential was accurate. And then again, because blockchain is transparent and gives you an audit record, you get to see all the changes. So in this way, you have a situation where the receiver of the credential knows something about the credential, and then they can go ahead and they can make that decision. So that's the approach that we've taken to it. In terms of the trust relationship, so the blockchain itself has the trust relationship architected into it. Under any circumstance, if there's a credential that's put onto the blockchain, we can go back and we can see where it came from. So I like to think about this as, where's the golden record? So if we take an academic credential as an example, the work that we're doing within the United States traces the academic credential back to the National Student Clearinghouse, which is the repository for academic credentials for 97% of the colleges and universities in the United States. The work we're doing in the veterinary industry in the United States traces the credentials back to the certification boards who actually grant the certifications for a veterinarian to practice. So at every step in the process, you know, we're keenly focused on where's the golden record that the blockchain points back to, and given the blockchain technology, you'll know, you know, where that credential came from.
Okay. Look, licensing is an interesting component of this, Alex, in terms of qualifications and the difference between license to practice. And of course, the one changes more often than the other one. So I think that's also an important dimension. So I'm going to swap now to the next part of our discussion. So Pankaj and Alex, you're not off the hook. We're going to bring you back just now. So just bear with us. I'm going to go with age before beauty. Is that okay, Manuela? So I'm going to go with Maureen first. Is that okay, Maureen? I hope that's not an insult. Maureen, if you can tell us a little bit more about what UNESCO is doing. And I've seen such amazing things over the last couple of months around global coalitions and work happening and how that relates to the topic that we're talking about today. Thanks, Maureen.
Thank you, James, and good afternoon to all colleagues. I'm happy to see Pankaj, Alex, and Manuela, and also I can see in the attendees a lot of colleagues that it's always a pleasure and honor to get engaged with them. And thank you to GDN to keeping us engaged and discussing. Of course, we missed New Delhi, but we didn't miss New Delhi because we are engaged and we have opportunities to share knowledge, learn from each other, and hopefully advance the agenda. Maybe, James, I would like to structure my presentation around three items that are short, of course, but for me, they are important. The first one is what we are learning from the COVID crisis that is important for our discussion today. The second, what are the implications in terms of the privacy, data privacy and security, and what UNESCO is suggesting to do. In very quick, but I would like to frame the intervention this way. First of all, I think it's very important to look at what the COVID-19 revealed for us. And I think while we knew that there is a digital gap and that there is a major challenge within and across countries related to access to technology, access to learning opportunities, access to recognizing those learning opportunities and the learning outcomes, I think that the COVID-19 revealed the importance and basically exacerbated this. I think we cannot discuss about digitalization, digital credentials without understanding that half of the world are still not connected, and that out of 1.6 billion learners that were out of education in the peak of the crisis, half of them didn't have access to internet or didn't have access to ICT and computer at home. So I think the equity and inclusion agenda has to be at the core of our discussion today, tomorrow, and going forward until we leave no one behind. So I think it's important to mention this. The second aspect is that, and this is related to what technologies are we speaking about. We have seen a migration to remote learning, but in reality, countries have been adopting different type of technologies, from high tech to low tech to no tech solutions. And it's important when we are speaking about credentialing, digital credentialing, credentials bank, and all this aspect, and artificial intelligence, blockchain, to consider that there is this wide range of technologies, and that any solution that we would like to look at has to cater for this mix of technologies. The third aspect that is important is that obviously, and I think Alex and Pankaj referred to that, is that we have seen the emergence of the importance of the learning pathways and the individual learning pathways. And that, of course, highlights the need for different type of credentials that are not necessarily full qualification, but micro-credentials, flexible type of credentials that can meet the needs of the individual and individual learning pathways. So I think this is an important aspect. The fourth aspect is that we have seen this shift of the edtech industry and edtech community from what I call from the periphery to the center. And here I'm borrowing, of course, from others. But the idea is that before the crisis, the edtech industry was there, but it was not central into the discussion when we speak about education, when we speak about lifelong learning. But today, we have seen how much this industry is at the center, and it has implications in the way we regulate education, we organize education delivery, and we partner together with the private sector, and Alex was referring to that. Maybe two last points that are critical for our discussion and have implication on what we put forward in this panel. The first one is that we have seen the importance of the datafication of education. And the datafication meaning all the data that is coming from the learning. It's not only about credentials. It's tracking your learning when you access to an online platform. It's tracking what you are doing on an online platform. It's tracking when you move from an education to a job market. So all this datification is important, and it has implications on the way we would like to look at credentials, but also we would like to regulate credentials and regulate data privacy and security. And the last piece, which is I think important, is about we are heading to the biggest recession, which is worse than the 2008 recession. And this, of course, will have a huge impact on the labor markets and on the people who will have to change jobs, learn new skills, and get their skills recognized and valued. Some of the data refers to around 400 million people that will be affected from the disruption of the labor market. And we are not at the end of the crisis, as many of us see, including in Europe, but elsewhere as well. So the momentum of discussing digital credentials, of discussing the lifelong learning dimension of it, of discussing how we will recognize those learning, how we will value to help people move from a job to another or to navigate very disrupted labor market seems to me critical, and obviously it puts our discussion today on the spotlight and highlight that. So basically this is what I wanted to say as a framing, because it's important that we frame our debate as part of this. The second part of my intervention is about data, learners' data, privacy and security. I would like to highlight a few points here. One is that there isn't a universal definition of privacy and security. And there are cultural differences, there are economic aspects, and there are also right-based dimensions that we need to take in the discussion. And the right-based dimension is critical because until now, we didn't see the privacy as a right, or at least not seeing it in the same way. And I think it's very important to consider, first of all, that probably in India, the privacy might be different or looked at different than in Africa, than in US, that the economic dimension of it might have different resonance, and that the right-based might be the common ground that we can consider going forward. But this is not a closed debate. We need to look at it more closely. But there are two other aspects that are important in our discussion, is that, I think you asked James, or colleagues asked Pankaj about the regulatory framework and the other, etc. But of course, regulatory frameworks are important here. Government will have to regulate, there should be a legislation. And there is a lot of spotlight on that. I would like to add another spotlight, is that there are other non-regulatory aspects that we have to take into consideration. One is privacy by design, meaning we need to ensure that those platforms that are being designed include the privacy dimension in them. And that the artificial intelligence that is underpinning some of these platforms is respecting ethical dimensions. So privacy by design is an important aspect. The second aspect is that we need to empower the stakeholders, meaning teachers, learners, and capacitate them and inform them about their rights and about the risks. We tend to think that people are aware and they know their rights and the risks. That's not true. We see it and we know it, including for child, but also for adult, unfortunately. And the last piece is how we can support government stakeholders in creating the right structure and the right missions for that. Let me give an example. Very few countries around the world and very few credential organizations have a privacy officer. And we tend to think that the private sector has a lot of problem with the privacy and they are spying. Government authorities are not respecting the rights and the privacy, and they can be even worse than the private sector. So non-regulatory dimension, empowering, capacitating, and looking at the privacy by design is also very important. I finish with the last point on what UNESCO is doing. One, first of all, we have launched the Global Education Coalition to support countries navigating and responding to the COVID-19 crisis. And in it, there is an important aspect that we looked at in terms of how these partners that are joining us, IBM is part of the coalition, Microsoft, but also startups like Pix in France and others. So the question is, first of all, to engage with them and to make them participating in this global response and supporting the agenda that we set up. Second, since the beginning, we have had webinars and initiative around learners' data and privacy and security. We had an important webinar during the crisis to tell member states, to tell the stakeholders, there is this challenge and we need to cope with it. And third, we have, and I'm happy to share with you some of the insights. We have produced a report about learners' privacy and security in the context of the COVID-19 and beyond, and we'll be very soon sharing that for peer review and for publishing. And for us, that will set an agenda for UNESCO to advance this as part of the right to education. And I stop there. It's about rights. It's about the right to education, and the right to privacy and security has to be framed within that perspective. Let me stop there, James. Thank you.
Thank you, Borin. You did well on time. And I wanted us to consider a question that Kathleen's putting in the Q&A, and it's all about equality. So while we can talk about rights and access and credentials and platforms and interoperability, how do we ensure equality, particularly in parts of the world where we have these huge differentials between the wealthy and the poor? But Manuela, I'm going to switch to you now. So we're very grateful you joined us. We were a bit worried in the beginning. If you can tell us a little bit more about what's happening in Europe on these topics. Thank you. You can go, Manuela.
Thank you. Thank you so. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. I was worried too in the beginning, but finally I managed. So I think Borin very well has set out a bit the framework to which I would also subscribe very much. The fact that COVID-19 has really brought us to digitalization much quicker than we would otherwise have had. I mean, the green and the digital transitions were there before COVID-19 struck us, but now they are even more important because they are seen as the way to get out of this situation, and they are a key ingredient of the recovery. And in that sense, I think you may have seen that the European Union has put forward a quite conspicuous recovery package, which is called the Recovery and Resilience Facility, that will actually support investment and reforms and education and digital skills, vocational training, lifelong learning clearly should play an important part in these investments, because it's there where we will have to invest. Borin was mentioning the fact that the crisis is having and will have, unfortunately, some impact on the labor market. And so it's important that people get the right training up to reskill or upskill to get into the jobs that will be available. So from that perspective, I think our work at the European Commission has been to, first of all, set out the policy framework for the next few years out of the COVID-19 crisis into the green and the digital world, which is a policy document that is called Skills Agenda. And one of the elements in there is actually what we discussed today, is about how to help the individual to strive in a digital learning environment. So, and probably you all have heard about Europass. Some of you may have done their CV on Europass and their cover letters when you applied for a job in Europass. It's a free online tool that people can manage for their lifelong learning, but also for looking for jobs. And now it will be also offering, showing the availability in terms of skill of learning opportunities that are out there, but also what are the skills that someone needs to have to access a specific job. So I think it will offer much more facets than it has so far. So it's a tool to communicate the skills, the qualifications, and the experiences, and that will, as it is in all European languages, free of charge, obviously, for a European continent where we speak so many different languages and we have different labor markets. It's absolutely an indispensable tool. It's a collaboration between the European Commission and the member states, and it is in this framework that we are developing digital credentials. So the idea here for us is to develop a European framework for issuing digital credential along with a digital wallet in which learners can keep their own record of their learning to control all their data. So users will also be available to easily share their digital credentials with, for example, employers or training providers. So what we are aiming at is at digital credentials that are flexible, because first, they can be implemented in different ways. They can be integrated in software tools, or they can be issued through a European service platform. They should capture all types of learning, from formal learning in all parts of the education system, to informal or non-formal learning, to micro learning. We have spoken just before about micro credentials. I think this is an important development that also digital credentials should cater for. What we are aiming and what we are working on is verifiable credentials on which any recipient of a credential can run checks within seconds. And our legislation on European digital credentials also ensures that digital credentials have the same legal value as the paper equivalents. And this is a very important element. The next stage would then be, as I already said, to use them also for micro credentials and to support the stacking of learning units. So by stacking also the micro credentials to help people to achieve a unity in, a broader, either a partial or a bigger qualification, or at least to show that they have done some training. Because I think when we look at the adult workforce, there is not so much motivation to engage in learn. So having credentials and digital credentials to show that you have done some learning, I think it's very, very important. Currently, this digital credential framework is being tested by 19 member states in the European Union, and they cover overall 350 million people. And some of these countries are already exiting the pilot phase and are preparing for adoption within their country. So that is where we are on the portability of learning. Thank you.
Manuela, can I ask you the question that Maureen posed, and maybe I'm being unfair to ask this off the cuff, but what has human rights got to do with the topic that we're busy with, and how is it being considered in the European context? Is that a fair question to ask?
Well, it's a difficult question, but I think human rights are a fundamental issue. I mean, it's our fundamental rights in the European Union, and that's why everything what we do at European level have to respect the human our Charter of Human Rights. So in that context, of course, what we do has to respect those fundamental rights. You are free to engage if you want. If you don't want, you are not. We have very, as everybody knows, Europe has very stringent privacy rights that need to be respected. So what we do has to abide by those criteria. And our entry point is that what we do should be inclusive. So we don't want to leave anybody behind in Europe. That's why what is developed at European level, like Europass or European digital credentials, is free, is available to everyone. So it's then the next question is, has everybody access to digital means? That's the next question, and that's where I was coming back, that clearly in Europe, we have still a considerable part of the population that has only basic digital skills, and about 17% that have no digital skills at all. And there is where I started with, that is the need to invest more into digital skills for everyone, for the workforce, but also for the wider population.
Thanks. This is such an interesting topic, and we have an hour, so I'm pushing a little bit hard. I'm so sorry. Maureen, did you want to respond to some of the questions? I see there's a question around some Australian developments and so on. If you want to briefly respond to that?
Yeah, maybe I think the point, and Manuela in a way put the seed for that, is that it's not sufficient to have the infrastructure. Is also then to see what are the entitlements that people have. And for example, the lifelong learning entitlement, you are asking Manuela about the European, and of course the European pillar of social rights is an important framework for that. But then you take a country like France, where there is the learning account. You take country like Korea, where there is also the learning and the bank account. So there are initiatives, Singapore also with the learning and lifelong learning entitlement. I think that what can advance also the agenda is not only to create the infrastructure, but also to create the tools and the means to improve access and expand access, particularly for the most marginalized and the ones that will not come easily to this area that we are referring to, because they have a social challenges, economic, but also because of the connectivity challenge, because we are speaking about particularly digital world. And again, not all people are connected, not all people are able to use the technology. And we have seen that during the COVID, including in a country like US, there are major challenges of connectivity, be it in terms of infrastructure, devices, but also in terms of the capacity and the skills. So I think we shouldn't underestimate those challenges. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Maureen. Pankaj, how about India, just in a minute or two, on what you've heard today, particularly on this link, I think is quite important on equality and data access and credentials. Any kind of parting comments from your side? Just unmute, Pankaj.
Like everybody is mentioning, India is a very large and diverse country. There's too much of diversity with rural areas, backward areas. So there's a lot of digital divide within the country. I mean, some people are having very good access to digital technology in terms of devices, networking, bandwidth. Some are not at all having any access. There's a lot of digital divide. And then the capacity building of the teachers. When we talk of teachers who have to teach online, the capacity building is not there because they were not used to teaching online. Similarly, the students, capacity building of the students to learn online, that is also, I mean, there's a lot of divide in that. So we are slowly trying to invest in the infrastructure on technology. Rather, I think the government in future will be investing more on technology rather than brick and mortar buildings, and the capacity building of teachers as well as students. We are investing a lot in that.
Great. I think that's a really good point. Alex, go for it.
Yeah, I just thought I'd jump in here for a minute. So, I mean, I think it's, again, I agree with the rest of the panel. What an important topic this is. One of the other things that I think we've all experienced with the COVID crisis, and this has been very true in the United States, is also this shift to the fact that people are working from home, they're working remote. This is a really fundamental change that's occurred, and it also has identified issues around disadvantaged populations, around diversity and inclusion. And, you know, we're going to have to continue to work together collaboratively to expand broadband access to all corners of our country, to make sure that people have devices that allow them to participate in the digital economy. I mean, it has really highlighted the fact that if you don't have access to the digital world, I mean, today you can't even work. And so, you know, it's a very broad and deep social issue. And both the public and private sector are going to need to continue to invest heavily in eliminating that gap.
And I mean, you're in a developed world context, Alex. In the developing world, of course, this entrenches. It's so much quicker, so much deeper. I've seen in South Africa in terms of our rural schools and what's happened. It's been incredibly scary what's happened in a couple of months, how they've gone backwards and lost that kind of learning that many other schools that had access they were going on as usual. And those disconnected schools were falling behind further every day. So it's quite scary. Manuela, a last comment from your side? Just unmute.
Well, yes, I think our challenge for the future is indeed to make sure that everybody is on board, I think, in the digital revolution. And that's really the critical issue here. Also in countries like European countries, it's about making sure that everybody is able to live in a digitalized world.
It's quite a paradox, but we don't have time to explore it more today. Maureen, a last comment from your side. Well, my panel is a bit slow today. Maureen, yes?
No, I'm here. I was trying to find the right button.
Okay.
Maybe to say that as part of the agenda that we are putting forward is an agenda about connectivity of learners and education institution. And in reality, before the COVID, we were speaking about connectivity for education institution. But the reality today is that we need to think about connectivity of learners and education institution. And it has a political dimension, and we are advancing a declaration on connectivity, but it has also operational dimension. That's through for example, the Global Education Coalition. We are working to support countries in setting plans for connecting learners and schools, costing that, and mobilizing public-private partnership, because this cannot be done only by public institution. It's quite costly, and it cannot be related only on education. It has to really be related to economic development, social development. That's what will make the investment more attractive. Otherwise, it's hard to that. But I think our discussion is about credential, and I would like to highlight what Alex was referring to. Today, we need to really advance this capacity to support representation of the learning and the learning outcomes, using micro-credentials, using portfolio, Europass, other forms, and ensure that these different forms can be connected, can be stacked, can be made recognized and valued. And for that, it cannot be only public sector and public stakeholders. We need to have the private sector on the table, because they are part of the way these resources and learning outcomes are recognized and valued. So it has to be this broader partnership. Let me stop there, James. Thank you very much to you. And
my last comment would be around learning outcomes and our understanding of learning outcomes to exactly do what Maureen and many of you have described. I think our science behind learning outcomes and our knowledge, skills, and competencies and values can be codified is lagging at the moment. And we need to encourage the academic community, networks like ENIC, NARIC, and GDN to engage with this topic more scientifically, so that the kind of machine learning, the kind of things, Alex, that you do can easily be automated. But I think we've still got a way to go around this. So we are 1 minute over time. I wish we had hours on this one because we're just touching on these key issues. But thanks to the GDN, to the Groningen Declaration Network, for arranging this. And Pankaj, unfortunately not in India. I had my trip planned, I promise you. Everything was done, even taking my wife with, but all of that didn't happen. So hopefully that's going to happen quite soon. And thank you to the panelists, Alex, Manuela, Boreen, and Pankaj. This was a really fantastic panel, and I hope we can stay in touch. Lastly, thanks to Akrawu for hosting us and making this webinar possible. Go well, look after yourself during this time, and I'm sure we'll see each other quite soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.